So I've already got a couple emails regarding the discussion boards and how basically you're not getting credit for it. Well, you are, but it doesn't look like it basically. And how you might respond to week 6 or week 7 and it says credit for week 4 and it's late. Well, yeah, it's like I said in my last video, it's going to look like that. Don't worry. Just keep doing what you're doing. Make sure to respond to each week's discussion board question. And again, I'm manually tracking it and you are getting credit for it, even though it might not look like it at the time. A little disclaimer about this week's discussion, and that is what I had to explain to my in-person class. If and when I present you guys with information, don't assume that this is what I personally believe. Again, this is just information I'm presenting to you, and in essence, I'm just the messenger. So in Norway, some guy is currently looking at a 21-year sentence after having killed 77 people. Because I present you that information, don't believe that I agree with his sentence. Like, I too might think that he should probably be strung up and put his head on a pike. And it's just for you guys to think about things differently from a different perspective than, well, what maybe you had perceived previously. It's good practice for you to entertain different possibilities and ideas. And so this week we're looking at government and politics. The first on the list is power, and that is the ability to exercise one's will over others. Whereas authority is power people agree to follow. So an example of this that I can think of is the classic Stanley Milgram experiments, where basically
psychologist Stanley Milgram had also looked at how we respond to authority. In order to understand how people were induced to obey unjust regimes and participate in atrocities such as the Holocaust, he set up an experiment. Volunteers were told they were taking part in scientific research to improve memory.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Where?
Separated by a screen, the teacher would ask the learner questions in a word game and administer an electric shock when the answer was incorrect. He was told to increase the voltage with each wrong answer.
Cloud. Horse. Rock. House. Answer. Wrong. 150 volts. Answer. Horse.
Oh. Experiment. That's all. Get me out of here. Get me out of here, please.
Continue, please. Go right on.
I refuse to go on. Let me out.
He refuses to go on. The experiment requires you continue, teacher. Please continue.
Participants didn't know that the learner was really an actor and the so-called shocks harmless.
You're going to get a shock. 180 volts.
Oh. I can't stand the pain. Let me out of
You
here.
can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man in there. I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman? I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please. All right, next one. Slow. Walk, dance, truck, music.
Two-thirds of volunteers were prepared to administer a potentially fatal electric shock when encouraged to do so by what they perceived as a legitimate authority figure. In this case, a man in a white coat.
375 volts. I think something's happened to that fellow in there. I don't get no answer. He was hollering with less voltage. Can't you check in to see if he's all right, please?
Milgram's findings horrified America. They showed that decent American citizens were as capable of committing acts against their conscience as the Germans had been under the Nazis.
this demonstrates how powerful authority can be over someone, how someone's willing to continue administering electric shock after the person's not even responding anymore, just because some guy in a lab coat with a clipboard tells you to. The book highlights, the history of voting and things like that. Well, in present day, we can see a modern day example of this almost with what's going on in Florida right now. There's all sorts of crazy stuff going on, like Bloomberg and guys like that. Millionaires across the country are just funneling money over to Florida to pay for these guys' fees and fines that they have over their head in order to get them voting, basically. Thousands of people have been disenfranchised the right to vote in the state of Florida, which is very pivotal right now, considering how it's a swing state right now. It could go either way. So everyone's pumping their resources into paying off these disenfranchised felons' fees in order to regain the right to vote. Even now, we're manipulating the public's ability to vote and participate in the democratic process. All right, on to the elephant in the room. On the topic of power and authority, no other figure in history has come to mind quite like Hitler, but a very interesting historical figure in regards to power and authority. He wrote this book called Mein Kampf, which translates to My Struggle in German, written by Hitler while he was in jail after trying to start a riot in the streets, basically. Essentially, the spirit of the book is about uniting the ethnic Germans and giving them more space to live. Democracy is a flawed system that can be manipulated by outside forces for their own gain, and to quote-unquote, unite the master race and return them to their proper status. So, incredibly nationalistic about this. He had great pride in his country. He was a wonderfully captivating, charismatic speaker. So again, if you look aside from the atrocities that he did, how was he able to accomplish this? Well, he was a great orator. He was a very good speech giver, and people rallied to him, and they listened because he was very passionate when he got up on his little soapbox and ranted. Interesting enough that during his grade school days, he wanted to become an artist. So if you know anything about Hitler, once his reign of terror was over, they discovered that he had stolen a bunch of crazy paintings, like super famous ones, like Pizarro, Rembrandt, Raphael. A bunch of these super historical and famous artists took a fancy to, because actually it was in grade school that he expressed the desire to just drop out of school and become an artist. When he was 16 after high school, he actually lived on the streets. He was homeless for 1 full year. He lived on the streets, and he was selling postcards that he did the art of, just leaned up against the side of buildings and things like that. Who knows? The course of history, had his father been more nurturing and encouraged this artistic side, he might have been some famous artist instead of a mass murdering psycho.
A Jew-hating, mass-murdering maniac, and they need to be destroyed.
Now, understand how he even got to be in a position of power. So we have to think about, what was Germany like during that time that he was around ranting and raving on the streets. The country was in economic crisis, thanks to the Dawes Act and the Young Plan. Major economic strain on an already struggling country. To pay back the U.S. put major strain on the economy. They were in a depression. Think about the last 8 months. Hasn't been fun. A lot of civil unrest, a lot of anxiety. People are not happy right now. Unemployment was through the roof. It was said that there were 6,100,000 people unemployed during that time. Poverty was rampant. The government was not working. As a result, the population split into two extremes. The communists on the far left and the extremist new party, the Nazis, on the right. How did Hitler feel about his country? Well, he grew up very proud of his country at the time. This was before World War I. He fought in the war, actually. If you've read a history book, they lost. And as a result, Hitler was salty about this, being very proud of the country he was from and fighting for this thing, to see it all get broken up like a pie and distributed amongst the victors. He was not happy about this. I mean, he basically took to the streets with his rabble, and prepare for my super high-tech demonstration devices here, my hands. So, what I find interesting and what you have to understand is, it wasn't like Hitler was out and about in the streets just ranting and raving, and all of a sudden, here's Hitler, and then one guy pops up and he's like, yeah, I agree with him. And then, yeah, I do too. And then, yeah, me. So it's not like he's just out ranting and raving around the streets and he's developing this, massive following. The stage was set. There was already imagine this mass. Like, if you've ever been to a concert and seen people like crowd surfing and stuff like that, where, you dive off the stage and people, woo, woo. It was kind of like that. The stage was already set. Germany was already pissed off. They were very unhappy with things, and along comes Hitler ranting and raving, and the whole crowd kind of looks over and goes, yeah, this guy
says exactly what's on our minds and the way we feel. And he basically just kind of comes walking up, and everyone crowd surfs him to the top, and the rest was history. Again, it wasn't necessarily that he had this doctrine and he got up on a soapbox and then he convinced millions of people to follow his will. It was he basically vocalized their thoughts, their feelings at that time. And so it was really easy for him to rise to that position of power. They put him there, basically. He was their man. He was the physical manifestation of a unified country's thoughts and feelings at the time. Well, at least the Nazi sentiment of it. Now, don't think that everything that took place in history didn't have something evil to do with Hitler. He actually ran for president of Germany, lost. This other guy was elected. Hitler became chancellor, and it was shortly after this election that the president met his demise, and it was overnight made himself dictator. He passed an act or a law that allowed him to become dictator overnight. And it was shortly after that he became dictator that he stripped all freedom of press, freedom of expression, and freedom of public assembly. Basically suppress any sort of opposition to, well, his position of power. Following this, which is eerie, he proceeded to murder any politician that opposed him, any sort of journalist, anyone in the press that had published any sort of media against him. As a result, 200 and some plus people died within like 24 hours. He ended up killing 200 and some plus people. And it wasn't just like, all right, I'm going to go kill this reporter that said something bad about me. It was like their whole family. Husband, wife, child, probably the dog too. From there, the rest is sort of history, as once he gained his position of power, we already know the rest of what happened and what Hitler did. But this is an extreme example of power and authority over a major population of people.